Bulalo, for those of you who don't know, is arguably one of the best Filipino dishes there is. It's made by simmering beef shanks, bones, and marrow for hours. Ramen, on the other hand, it's the very description of comfort food. But I probably didn't even need to tell you that. So in this video, we're taking the best of both dishes and creating Bulalo Ramen. For the main topping, we're using a less known cut of beef called the digital muscle. It's a tendony, muscular portion of a cow, which sounds like it's gonna be tough, but cooked in the right way, it can be rich and tender. It's also cheaper than most cuts of beef. This one I got from a local Asian supermarket, but if you can't find any, you can use beef shanks instead. Give it a quick rinse and set aside. For making the stock, we're using beef bones. This is about 4 pounds. Give it a rinse and also set aside. Depending on how much you're making, you might want to add more bones. I was making 8 servings and it didn't seem like enough, so I added 3 more pounds of beef neck bones. I've always cooked the digital muscle sliced. This time I wanted to try and cook it whole. So I only sliced one of the muscles and left the other one in the bowl. The results were mostly the same in terms of texture, but I think the sliced one might have tasted a little bit better. Let the bones soak up for at least 4 hours. If you can do this overnight, that would be even better. Make sure you have enough space in the fridge before you do this step, and if you don't, just cook whatever you have in the fridge. If you get the chance, try to replace the water every few hours. After the bones are done soaking, throw the bones in a large enough pot and fill it with just enough water to cover the bones. I gave the bones one last rinse, but it really doesn't matter because we'll be rinsing it again in a bit. Place the pot on the burner on high heat to bring the water to a boil. The water here is red because the neck bones I added were still a little bit frozen. After the water starts boiling, wait for a few more minutes for the scum to surface on top. Then take it away from the heat and back into the sink. Clean the bones individually and make sure that the black or gray matter are mostly removed. Do one final rinse and make sure the water is clear before putting it back on the burner. Lower the heat to a simmer once the water starts to boil. We'll be using some long green onions or spring onions if they're not available. Cut off and set aside about 3 inches worth off of the white end. We'll be using this for toppings later. The rest of it will go into the pot as aromatics. We'll also include a whole onion cut into quarters. Next, cut a corn into chunks and add it to the broth. The corn actually overpowered the broth here, so maybe just use half of the amount or throw in the corn halfway through the boiling process. Once it starts to boil, skim off any scum that surfaces, then bring it down to a simmer. Slice the kernels off of another cob and this will be used as toppings later. Let the bones simmer for at least 6 hours and make sure to check every hour or so to add more water if needed. About 2.5 hours before the broth is done, take out the beef meat from the fridge. You can see the sliced beef has already lost most of its color to the water. Throw the meat into another pot and we'll be cooking this separately, Bulalo style. Add some salt, whole peppercorns, some normal corn, and a quartered onion. Bring it to a boil, then set to simmer once it boils. This will be ready in about 2 hours. Skim off any of the excess fat from the stock and make sure to leave some as it gives the stock more flavor. Here I'm making 7-minute eggs. To get that perfect 7-minute egg, use large-sized egg left at room temperature for at least 30 minutes. Make sure the water is properly boiling before throwing in the egg. I'm doing 4 at a time so the water doesn't lose all of its heat after adding the eggs. Also have an ice bath ready for once it's done. Take the ends of the long onion that we've set aside earlier and chop it as finely as you can. I'm not really good at chopping them finely, but this will do. While chopping the long onion, the sliced corn was boiled for 5 minutes. For the final topping, we're preparing some baby bok choy. This will be blanched for 2 minutes off camera. Now we make the tare. I went for a simple shoyu tare. In hindsight, a shio tare would have fit the theme better, but shoyu tare turned out okay, surprisingly. I used half a cup of water, this entire sheet of kelp cut into bits because I forgot to soak it in water last night, a half cup of Usukuchi shoyu, and just a pinch of dried anchovies. Bring that to a boil and let it simmer for a few minutes, then strain. It might have probably needed some sake and mirin as well, but I did not add it here, so it mostly tasted like fish sauce. For the oil topping, I just fried some garlic in sesame oil for about 5 minutes, then removed the garlic. At this point, the bones have been simmering for 6 hours, and the meat for about 2. For the ramen noodles, I'm using the instant kind made by Hime. It's the kind that looks like bundled spaghetti. You can use fresh ones if you like. I just thought it was a good idea to use instant ones so I can focus on improving the soup's flavor in the future. Now it's ready for plating. Add stock to the noodles. I added about a tablespoon of Tare to the bowl. Just add more to your liking. Next, add all the toppings we prepared. I added about a teaspoon of sesame oil, half an egg, slices of beef digital flexor muscle, some corn, and finally, the finely sliced green onion. Overall, I'd rate this recipe about a 6 out of 10. I think there's a lot to improve in this recipe, maybe starting with the Tare. But what do you think? Leave a comment below if you have any suggestions on how to make this dish better. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like or subscribe for more experimental recipes in the future. Thanks for watching.